the preface of Genesis 1 through 11, and God tells several stories in this preface. He lets us know that His creation is what? It's good. God makes creation. He puts us in it, and His creation is good. And then He gives us the ability to rest from creating. And so in creation, He stops creating. Excuse me. Then He presents us with some conundrums. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with this as humans in this creation? And He offers choices to us. Will we succumb to what He's placed there in front of us, or will we overcome it? And sadly, we know the answer to that. We know the answer to that not only in the creation story, but in our own lives. How many times have we been faced with a choice where we chose to fulfill our body's own desires or our own selfish wants and needs? So, as we move on, we have Cain and Abel in the field, and God going to Cain and saying, "Hey, what are you gonna do here? You know, you got a choice coming up here. You're going out into a field, and you've got a choice to make. You need to start making it here." And we know how that ends. Not too good. So we move on, and we kind of spiral out of control, and we end up with Noah. We end up in the story with Noah, and God says every desire or every thought, every inclination of man was for what? Evil. And so, but God finds favor in Noah, and so God chooses to recreate the world with Noah in an ark. It's a different creation. Noah steps out, Noah opens the door, Noah comes out of the ark, and Noah has dominion over the animals. You know, God tells them that they can kill and eat now from the animals themselves. They're no longer vegetarians. They have more dominion and power. And God stops destroying in this story. Right? The chiasm, the center of the chiasm there said, "And God remembered Noah." Right? So God remembers His creation that He's bringing over. And so we have this new world. And then Noah starts creating. He builds a vineyard. And he doesn't know when to stop creating, so he ends up drunk. And so then he ends up, well, we know that, how that story ends. And he doesn't know when to stop destroying either. So he not only curses his grandson, but he continues to curse. He puts a curse on the generations that follow. So his destruction continues forever. And so we find that Noah cannot stop destroying either. So then we find that we find ourselves in the place of Babel. And this is kind of a story of man as a whole. And what is their common language? Let us what? Make a name for ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. See, that's a plural. That's a we. And that's the commonality. That's their common goal, is let us make a name for ourselves. And so we find that God says, no, that's not the goal. And He disperses them. So God it's almost like God at that point does another rewrite and says, I'm not able to talk to man as a whole. And He starts to focus on one man, one family, and eventually one nation. So we find ourselves with Abram. So who remembers what we talked about with Abram last time? Do y'all remember some of the things that we talked about? A genealogy, lost in a genealogy. Usually we start the story of Abraham with verse 12. with chapter 12. But he's actually introduced in chapter 11. And he's introduced in some weird ways. We said that he is introduced in a way that says, well, he marries this Ishka, or, we are introduced to Ishka, and then we find that Sarah, and then we find that Abram is trying to provide for a woman who is barren. Well, what's the problem with that? Suddenly, he's not making a name for himself anymore. He is providing for a person, someone who may not be provided for. He's taking this woman into his household, and he is marrying her with the understanding that they will have 0 kids. Abraham will not perpetuate his generations. So let's start with chapter 12 here. Who would like to read some here? Come on, y'all. I'll start out. Y'all get in the mood. The Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. And he starts with a promise. He says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who curse you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham left. So the call of Abraham says, go. And he goes. So we see that Ryan introduced us to the meaning of the word Betav. Do y'all remember that? B-E-T-A-V, Betav. That is the house of my father, right? So Abram steps out of his Betav. He leaves his house, and this is big. This is not just something that you do. You don't leave your father's house. But we see in chapter 11, it seems like Terah had started this journey, and then suddenly, when his son dies, he stops. And so let's back up just a little bit, because I want to read you all a verse in 11. Let's see here. Let me find it. All right, so here we go. Verse 31. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his wife's son Abram. Together they set out from Ur of the Chaldees to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Now, if you know the story, you know that these words, but they settled there, have been used already. And if you will look back in the first part of chapter 11 about the Tower of Babel, they come to a place, and what do? They settle there. And so it seems like almost Terah was stepping out and doing what God wanted him to do, but he stopped. Whether it was in mourning or in grief for his son or whatever happened, Terah stopped short. And God says, no, I'm not wanting you to settle here. And so he goes to a man that has shown character in the man of Abram, and he says, I will make a great nation of you, but you got to go. So what does land have to do with things? What do you do when you buy a tract of land, or let's say you go buy a new house? What do you do when you move into that house? You settle. You make it your home. So what do?
Put Put your stuff in.
You put your stuff there. You move it in. You're like, I don't. If you're like my wife, you watch an HGTV and you're like, I like that. You can do that, can't you, Johnson? Yeah, you can do that. It'll be easy. It's easy to say, but I do it. But I do it. Ah, so you make it. You make it your own. You make it a name in it, right? You perpetuate it there. You make it yours. So when you settle somewhere, basically you're putting down roots. This is where I'm going to be. This is where we're going to build. Let's turn that around. If you stay mobile, if you put down roots, are you kind of up in the air on what's maybe coming next? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? If you stay mobile, a lot of that keeps you dependent on maybe God. If you're constantly on the move and you don't really know what your next journey is going to be, maybe you're trusting the story. Maybe you're trusting that God is going to provide as you go. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with settling down or there's anything with the things that we do, but that's not what God wants at this point. Yeah.
When the Lord picked the land for him to settle in, he already knew that it was going to be able to provide him food, water, animals to kill, whatever. So it is a different land than like us.
Right. So he tells him to go. So they had settled there. So Abram is standing up. He's leaving his father's house. What does that also mean he's leaving? His father's what? Money? There's also something we don't think about very often because we are a God-following people. But he's also leaving his father's gods. So this is very, we're a very pagan lifestyle here. And there's actually a midrash that talks about this. There's actually what we talk about the midrash. We talk about a Jewish commentary and it actually talks about Abram went into his father's house and he destroys all of the idols and he leaves an axe beside one idol that was laying there. And Terah goes in and says, "What have you done here?" And Abram says, "I didn't do that. It's obvious that the idol that has the axe in its hand, that's the one that killed all your other idols." And Terah says, "No, that can't be. That's impossible. I made these with my own hands." And Abram says, "Then why do you worship them?" Now, simply, that's so we don't know if that happened or not. But, that was those ancient sages searching for the reason that Abram was chosen. Because basically, we get more of an introduction about Noah. At least with Noah, we hear that Noah was a righteous man. With Abram, God just says, "Hey, go." And he goes. So we have to understand that this is the question that has been wrestled with for thousands upon thousands of years. Why did God choose Abram? And so last week we learned of Abram possibly wasn't interested in making a name just for himself. He wasn't interested in perpetuating himself. And when God tells him to go, he goes. And God tells him, "I will bless all nations through you." But does he go alone? No. Who does he take? Sarah and Lot. And who's Lot?
Nephew.
His nephew. Of who? The dead brother. So we have two ways that we can look at this. And we have two ways that the Jews have looked at this for thousands of years. Abram is doing this to perpetuate his brother's name for the same reason that he's marrying Sarah. Or he is stepping out and saying, God has promised me that I'm going to be a great nation. It's obvious that I'm not going to do it with this beautiful lady that I have married here, because what is she? We learned early. We learned first thing out of the gate about Sarah was that she was barren. So we have to assume that Abram knows this. And so he takes Lot with him to say, with this, in my brother's name, I will perpetuate. This is how God is going to bless nations. I can't father children, but Lot can. So let's continue to read. So verse 4. Let's somebody pick up with verse 4 there and read a little bit. You got it?
So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of the Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him.
All right, so there's a tower, a tiny tower. Right? And Brian talked about this last week a little bit, how we look at, they built a great tower to make a name great for themselves. And God says, that's not what I want. It's not what you're doing. That's not the goal. And so here Abram comes, and Abram builds a tower to who? To the Lord. Abram doesn't make a tower to make his name great. He builds a small tower. And how else do you kind of, God's promised him land. They move out. They're traveling along. And the Lord says, to your offspring, I will give this land. Okay? Whoa, God, you just told Abram that, to keep moving, to go, and all of a sudden you get into here, and you say suddenly that to your offspring I'll give this land. What's the temptation there? To stay, right? So Abram is offered this land. He said, God says, to this I will give your offspring. And Abram says, wow, that's pretty cool. So he builds an altar there to the Lord. And then what does he do? He travels on. He does not settle. God is keeping him mobile. And this is the character of Abram. God says, this I'm going to give to your offspring. And Abram's like, wow, that's pretty neat. This is really cool. This is a beautiful place. And then he stands up and leaves because he knows that it's not time. All right, pick up with verse 8.
From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev.
All right, so we see that he builds two permanent structures. An altar here, an altar there. But what's he living in? A tent. He is staying. So what are his permanent structures that he has built? Altars. To who? To God. It wasn't to say, look, we've been here. Look, this is mine. No, he builds an altar to the God in two places and centers his mobile tent. All right, so this is where Ryan left us last week. Now there was a famine in the land, so God says, I'm going to give you a great nation. I'm going to make you into a great nation. You are going to be great. All of the peoples will be blessed through you. But right now you're going to be hungry. So he's immediately faced with two big decisions. God has said, you are going to be a great nation. Leave your people with your barren wife. Okay, how am I going to be a great nation, a great people, and I got a barren wife? God says, I'm going to keep you forever. You know, you're going to be a blessing. And the first thing you do is you think your family's going to starve to death. And all of the people that you just brought with you. There's a great famine in the land. Now, when there's a famine in the land, where do you go? Egypt. Everybody goes to Egypt. And so there was a National Geographic years ago that talked about the 3 most fertile places in the world. 2 of them are in the United States. Like in the Midwest, there's like 4 feet of farmable topsoil. Up in the other plains, there's 6-8 feet of topsoil farmable. But in the Nile Delta, take a guess how many feet of farmable topsoil there are if you did a dissection of it. Let's take a guess. Nope. Nope. There's over 100 feet of farmable topsoil in the Nile Delta. So if you took everybody pushes off the topsoil to get to the foundation. You just keep pushing in Egypt. So if you want to go create food, you go to Egypt. So here's Abram. He's building altars and pitching tents, and all of a sudden he's hungry. So let's see here. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for, what's it say here? A while. Maybe we're seeing a little bit of character flaw in Abram. Well, let's talk about that for a second. What do we see in our first 3, or with these first 3 kind of things that we see with Abram? We see his faith in God. Love for family. But if we're going to talk about a character flaw, maybe what do we look for? I'm not trying to find flaws. I'm just looking for things that we may want to notice.
He ain't settled.
He hasn't settled, that's right. Miss Rita from the back. That's very, very good. So God promises that he's going to be a great nation. I better take a lot. You come along through here, and we get hungry all of a sudden, and God and Abram says, "Well, we're hungry." And I get it. Your family's hungry. What are you going to do? You're going to do your best to provide. But we also know that Abram is not perfect. And maybe God's trying to teach him some things along the way. So we go to Egypt because we're hungry. And hunger is a big driving force. How many times did I say I was hungry this morning, Crystal? Like 3 or 4? She's like, okay. Hunger drives us to do things a lot of times. I'm hungry, let's pull over. I'm hungry, let's cut our, I got to get up, I'm hungry. Hunger is a driving force. So we go to Egypt, and we may be like, whoa, trust the story, Abram. Trust the story, God's going to provide for you. That's sometimes easier said than done. Have you ever been faced with a decision and you think you choose the right thing, in the moment, but a couple of years later, you're like, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have trusted the story. I wish I would have trusted what God had in line for me. So we have an interesting pause point here. We have the place where, when do we trust and when do we act? That's hard. That is a hard place to be in your life. And I'm not saying it's always wrong to act. And I'm not saying you're always going to know when the place that you're supposed to act is. I'm not saying you lay in the bed with symptoms of something and you're like, well, God, I'm just going to trust the story. I'm not going to go to the hospital. You know, maybe that's not, but, you know, those are things that we're faced with, right? So we may be seeing a slight glimpse of a character flaw. Maybe we see in the future, maybe he runs ahead of God a little bit. Verse 11.
John,
Okay.
do you think it's like pointing out a character flaw, or do you think it's just pointing out that we're human?
Life, that's exactly right.
Basically.
Well, and we all, and I think we all have things that we struggle with. And whether they're character flaws or whether they're struggles, you know, we all have things that we struggle with. And, you know, maybe Abram is just doing his best to fulfill God's promise. You know, maybe Abram is just really working hard to make sure God does what he's supposed to do. Good point.
And sometimes it's hard to wait on God.
It is very hard to wait on God. You can be hungry and do that, and I'm not talking about just hungry. You can be worried, you can be, you know, there's a lot of things that you can be in the time that you wait on God.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What we're about to read, I wonder how Sarah felt about it.
Oh, where we're going into right now?
Yeah.
Well, so let's get there. So now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because it was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. We always start with a compliment, don't we? That's how we start things. Us men, how I know what a beautiful woman you are. And when the Egyptians, when they see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So we don't see Sarah say anything back, but like you say, they could have been in pure cahoots with one another. Could have been, so we kind of read through the word Sarah, and that princess that we see, that is almost in a warrior standpoint. It's almost like when we read the name of Sarah, that princess that she is named, it's like she is a commander. So sometimes we kind of read through that and we see Sarah and we see princess and we think of princess.
She may have understood what was happening, the danger, but on the other hand, she may have been very offended by it.
Possibly so. So I also want to understand that when he says you are my sister, this is a horizontal relationship. When he says you are my sister, she was his what? Well, and
Niece.
before that,
And his niece.
she was his niece. So in the Hebrew, you have horizontal relationships and you have vertical relationships. Nope. Well, yeah, that's what I said. You have vertical and horizontal. Did I do that better? All right. So vertical would be my father. So that would be people in the up and down. Well, when you say brother and sister, you have horizontal. That could, in the Hebrew, that could mean even niece. That could be anywhere. So we do have an explanation of that he wasn't technically lying. They just weren't sharing the whole truth. They were saying, yes, she is my vertical or my horizontal relationship, she is a relative of mine. Now, what does that mean? If he's the patriarch, what is his job as patriarch? To take care of and what? If you have women in your household, what is your job to do with them?
Get them married.
Marry them off. So it seems as though Abram is saying, you will go in, I'll be taken care of, because there will be suitors that see how beautiful you are, and they will give us gifts. What do you do when you try to woo a patriarch out of one of his women? You give gifts. So, and Abram says that. It even says that, I will be treated well because of you. So here they go. They make this plan. They're going to go. And then maybe it was a they and maybe it was a he, but it doesn't matter. They go into the land and they say, Abram's like, okay, we'll go in. I'll get gifts. We'll get provided for. And then before you get married off, we'll just ease on out of here. You know? We'll just kind of in the dead of night, while I got all the gifts here and I got all the goodies, then we'll just ease on out. It shows a shrewdness. And I think a lot of times we kind of get uncomfortable with stuff like this. We read through the accounts of the Bible, and a lot of times we see the shrewdness that people do. They don't always tell the truth, right? They don't always do the right thing, or they don't always make a situation move to fit what they need at the time. And we don't really see God in opposition of these things, but we know that God we know that eventually He's going to flip the script. Because the one person that you don't say no to, and the one person that you don't plan on taking an interest in your wife, and the one person who doesn't ask permission is who? Pharaoh. And so they go into Egypt. They've got this plan. And all of a sudden, God says, well, Pharaoh goes in and takes. That's what kings do. So he goes in, and the one person that they couldn't plan for finds an interest in his wife. And he gives gifts. And Abram takes the gifts. But man, this is not what we planned for, was it? This is not what, and we'll get back to why we're careful not to run out of time here. So, verse 17. Somebody read 17 for me.
For the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarah.
So, here we are. God is going around what their plans are, and He's having to fix things, maybe. You know, God's going in and saying, this is not what I had planned for you. This is not how I was going to provide for you. And so He puts on Pharaoh diseases. And Pharaoh says, what have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she was my sister? And we know why, because they would have possibly killed him. Because if you kill the patriarch, now all the women and possessions are whose? They're mine. That's the kind of world we're in right now. We didn't have the police that are going to come by and say, okay, we see here you killed Abram and we're going to put you in jail. No, this is a world where the strong survive. You are, and we're going to see in the next story here where Abram has to go and rescue Lot, that the strong survive. The one person who could take all of Abram that he had, Pharaoh, goes in and gets her, and now he's stricken. So why doesn't he kill Abram? Why doesn't he kill Abram? I think he's probably got a little fear struck in him at this point. He takes a woman into his house, out of this household, and all of a sudden everything he's got, he's sick. He's got diseases. I think he's got a little fear of the Lord in him. If nothing more than just a little fear of Abram here. So Abraham goes back. So take out, let's go through here. What have you done to me? She is my sister. Verse 20, Pharaoh gave orders about Abram and his men. And he sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So the plan works. He keeps the gifts. He's provided for. God takes care of him in spite of his plan and sends him on his way. Now, verse 13, or chapter 13 there, that's not, just mark through that. That don't really exist. Remember, chapter markers are simply the scribes trying to keep track of everything. So Abram went to Egypt, to the Negev, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went to the place that he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So where is he? Where is he right now? Back where he began. So we've gone to Egypt and we've come back to Egypt. So if we go this way, let's say we go this way to Egypt, and we come this way from Egypt, what might we have? Huh? A chiasm. We may have us a chiasm here. We have gone to Egypt in 3 places. We've come back in that exact same order. The center of this chiasm, if you play it out, is verse, let's see, let me make sure of it. Verse 15. Somebody read for me verse 15 that says that this is the center of the chiasm.
Which chapter?
Oh, sorry. It's back. So we're not in 13. We're in 12. This is just an extension of chapter 12. So it's verse 12, or chapter 12, verse 15.
And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace.
What might we learn from this chiasm, with this center verse being that Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's palace? Maybe things don't always go as planned. That's what has been taught in this chiasm. Things don't always go as planned. We must continue to trust in the story. I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you about, we got a couple minutes. Me and Crystal, a few years back, before she started this new job, we were in a tizzy because her job had absolutely consumed her every moment. And so being a social worker, being in that kind of area, it's just, how many hours were you working a day? Probably 10, 12, sometimes 15, 16. And so she set out on a journey, didn't you? And, you know, we kind of, so she set out on a journey. She was going to get her master's. And we went into this dead of school and all this. Go ahead. Well, tell me. Then you help me with the story.
So, I applied for a job, and I got it within the same organization, but it was going to require a lot of traveling. And then this other job just popped up, and I started the application the day it was closing, and I never finished it. And they called me for an interview and told me I needed to finish my application, and I started laughing, and I said, well, I decided I wasn't going to apply. And they were like, well, do you want to interview? And I was like, 16-hour days to an 8-hour day to no on call, 5 days a week, some of them. So, and then I got scared that job wasn't gonna last. So then I said, well, I gotta do something because this isn't gonna continue. So then.
Because they were federal funds and those could fall off.
So then I decided to go back in.
And so the job ended up becoming permanent, and she didn't have to go through that. And we talk often about how, in that, because we both talked about that, we both discussed it. I've encouraged her to go on and get her master's and all that. And sometimes we have a problem of knowing when to trust the story, when to go, when to stay. Man, what a beautiful place that we have that says we are in God's hands. So I have so much more that I didn't get to today, but we got to stop. You have any comments or questions? I hope I've done somewhat of a decent job with this because it's a beautiful story. Any questions? Anything you feel I've ran over, missed out on, or saying wrong? Thank y'all.